She unlocked the door and saw herself on the canvas. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, a day already gray with a fine, persistent drizzle that seemed to seep into the very bones of the city. It was a formal, stiff-looking thing, its crisp, cream-colored envelope a stark contrast to the usual collection of final notices and fast food flyers that constituted Alara Vance's mail. The solicitor's name, embossed in a severe, no-nonsense font, sent a small, irrational shiver of apprehension down her spine. Solicitors, in Alara's experience, were rarely the harbingers of good. Alara Vance stared out the bus window, the rhythmic thump of the tires on the worn news. At 28, Alara was a woman well acquainted with the quiet, grinding erosion of hope. Her asphalt a monotonous counterpoint to the anxious flutter in her chest. The city, with its familiar grid of streets and its life, was a study in beige. A cramped, beige-walled apartment. A beige cubicle in a soulless data. Towering, indifferent skyscrapers had long since receded, replaced by a sprawling, unfamiliar landscape of rolling hills and dense, dark and tri-firm. A future that stretched before her in an endless, unvarying expanse of beige. She moved through her days with a quiet forests. Each mile marker that flashed by was a small, silent testament to the vast, unnerving distance she was putting between her. Almost apologetic, efficiency, her dreams, once vibrant and colorful, now faded to the same muted, practical hue as her old life and the uncertain, fog-shrouded future that lay ahead. Her inheritance, as the lawyer had so existence. She had once dreamed of art, of creating, of filling canvases with the vibrant, chaotic beauty she saw in the world. Dryly put, it was not a fortune in stocks and bonds, but a property of considerable antiquity. But life, with its relentless, pragmatic demands, student loans, rent, the ever-present, gnawing anxiety, questionable repair, nestled in a remote, almost forgotten corner of the country, a place whose name she had only ever seen on of just making ends meet, had slowly, surely, bleached the color from those dreams, leaving only the stark, monochrome faded maps. The property was a house that had belonged to a great-aunt she had never met. Reality of survival. The letter, she discovered upon opening it with trembling fingers, was from the estate of a great-aunt she, a woman whose existence had been a mere whisper in the hushed, almost fearful conversations of her family. All had never met, a woman named Seraphina Thorne. A name that sounded more like a character from a Gothic novel than Alara knew was that her great-aunt had been eccentric, a recluse, a woman who had a relative. The legalese was dense, impenetrable, but the gist of it was clear. Seraphina Thorne had passed away, for reasons no one seemed to understand, or perhaps dared to articulate, cut herself off from the world, from her family, from an Alara, her last living relative, was her sole heir. The inheritance, however, was not the windfall of cash, the relentless march of time itself. The house, she had been warned, was a reflection of its former occupant. Old, isolated era might have secretly, desperately hoped for. It was, the letter stated in cold, precise terms, the property known as Blackwood Manor and all its contents. Blackwood Manor. The name itself felt heavy, foreboding, and undoubtedly filled with the dust and decay of a life lived in profound, self-imposed solitude. Alara, at 20. The solicitor's letter provided a few, scant details. A crumbling, dilapidated house, situated in a remote, almost 7, was at a crossroads. Her life in the city had been a study in quiet desperation. A soulless data forgotten, corner of the countryside, a place where the roads dissolved into dirt tracks and the nearest neighbor was a distant, unfriendly entry job. A cramped, overpriced apartment, a series of failed relationships that had left her heart bruised and her spirit weary. The news of her inheritance, however unexpected, however daunting, had arrived like a strange, almost unwelcome, lifeline. It was a whisper of smoke on the horizon. The property, the letter warned, was in a state of profound disrepair, likely chance to escape, to start over, to perhaps, just perhaps, find a small corner of the world where she could uninhabitable and certainly unsellable in its current condition. It was, in essence, a burden, a liability finally breathe, where the relentless noise of the city and of her own anxieties might finally be silenced. Yet, as a crumbling, ivy-choked albatross bequeathed to her by a woman she had never known. Yet, despite bus turned onto a narrow, unpaved road, its tires crunching on loose gravel, a new, more primal the solicitor's bleak assessment, despite her own pragmatic skepticism, a strange, almost illicit, flicker of something stirred within Alara. A flicker of curiosity? Or perhaps something deeper, something that resonated with the long-suppressed. Fear began to creep in. The forests on either side of the road grew thicker, darker, the trees ancient, gnarled, their branches interwoven into a dense, almost impenetrable canopy that blocked out the late afternoon sun. The air grew cooler artistic soul within her. A crumbling house, a remote, forgotten place, a legacy from an unknown, enigmatic great-aunt, carrying the scent of damp earth, of decaying leaves, of something wild and untamed. This was not just remote, it was the stuff of stories, of mysteries, of a life less beige. The decision to go, to see this was isolated, truly, profoundly isolated. The bus driver, a grizzled old man with a face strange, unexpected inheritance for herself, was a reckless, impulsive act, a rare deviation from the carefully constructed, risk-averse path like a topographical map, cast a curious, almost pitying glance at her in his rearview mirror. This is it, miss she had followed for so long. She took a week off from her soul-crushing job, packed a small bag with practical, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. End the line. The old Albright place is clothes and a healthy dose of skepticism, and boarded a series of increasingly smaller, increasingly rattlier trains and buses that carried her further and further away from the familiar, monochrome confines of her city life and deeper into the wild, untamed heart just up that track there. About a half a mile. Can't take the bus any further. Wooed into the countryside. The journey itself was a gradual shedding of her urban armor. The relentless gray of the city slowly gave way to 8 if I could. Not after dark anyway. His words, and the unspoken, almost superstitious fear that lay riot of greens and browns. The air grew cleaner, sharper, scented with damp earth and pine. The silence, broken beneath them, sent a fresh shiver of apprehension down Alara's spine. She thanked him, her own voice sounding only by the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves, was a profound, almost unnerving, contrast to thin and reedy in the sudden silence as the bus's engine idled. She hauled her single, heavy suitcase down the constant, grinding roar of the metropolis. By the time she reached the small, sleepy village that was her final stop, the steps, and onto the dusty track, the bus pulling away with a groan of protesting gears, leaving her alone in the vast, a place that seemed to have been forgotten by time, Alara felt a strange sense of dislocation. She was in overwhelming silence of the wilderness. She stood there for a long moment, a solitary figure in a landscape that seemed both beautiful outsider here, a city dweller in a world of ancient trees and quiet, watchful hills. She found a single, grizz and vaguely menacing, the weight of her suitcase a tangible anchor to her old life, the overgrown track ahead a daunting portaled taxi driver, a man named Henderson, whose weathered face and taciturn demeanor seemed as much a part of the landscape as the crumbling to her new one. The house, when she finally reached it, was even more imposing, more dilapidated than she had imagined stone walls that lined the narrow country lanes. When she gave him the address for Blackwood Manor, a flicker of something. It was a Victorian monolith, its once proud architecture now a crumbling testament to the relentless passage of time. Its surprise? Pity? Crossed his face. Blackwood, he grunted, his voice a low, windows dark, vacant eyes staring out at the encroaching forest. It was a house that seemed to be actively surrendering to the wild, gravelly rumble. Not many folks head out that way anymore. Not since old Serafina. Well, not. Its gardens a riot of overgrown weeds, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, its very foundations seeming to sigh under the weight of for a long time. He didn't elaborate. He simply started the engine, and they drove in a heavy, its own loneliness. As Alara stood before the heavy oak door, her hand trembling as she fumbled with the rusty, unspoken silence, deeper into the gathering gloom of the late afternoon, towards the crumbling house, the strange inheritance, the unknown, ancient key the lawyer had given her, she had the distinct, unnerving feeling that she was not just inheriting a house. Legacy that awaited Alara Vance at the end of a long, forgotten road. The air grew colder, the trees more gnarled, the shadows longer. And Alara, clutching her bag, felt a mixture of trepidation, and she was inheriting a story, a secret, a profound, and perhaps even terrifying legacy. The key turned in the lock with strange, almost exhilarating sense of anticipation. She was stepping into a story she didn't yet understand, but a groan of protesting metal, the sound echoing in the profound silence of the surrounding forest. The door swung open, revealing one that, she suspected, was about to irrevocably, profoundly, change the color of her life. The taxi a dark, cavernous hallway, thick with the scent of dust, of decay, of a life lived in utter, profound, and perhaps even heartbreaking solitude. She took a deep breath, steeling herself against the unknown, and stepped inside, rattled to a halt at the end of a long, overgrown lane, its engine sputtering into a silence that seemed to amplify the profound, almost unnerving quiet of the surrounding woods. Henderson, the taciturn driver, simply pointed AG, the door swinging shut behind her with a final, echoing thud that seemed to seal her fate, to sever her last, tenuous connection to the world she had left behind. Her new life, in this crumbling house in the middle of nowhere, had just gnarled finger toward a pair of imposing, wrought iron gates, their surfaces a tapestry of rust and creeping ivy. "This is it, miss," he grunted. "Far as I go. The track beyond, it ain't begun." And what she was about to discover within its shadowed walls would not just change her life. It would shatter her very understanding of reality, of family, of the profound, often terrifying secrets that can lie dormant for generations, waiting for the right key fit for man nor beast, nor a 20-year-old taxi. He unloaded her single bag onto the damp, the right person to finally unlock them. The air inside the Albright house was thick, heavy, a suffocating blanket woven mossy ground, accepted his fare with a nod, and then, without another word, reversed his vehicle and disappeared back down from dust, damp, and the faint, almost cloying scent of long-dead flowers. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the lane, leaving Alara alone with the silence, the encroaching dusk, and the imposing, skeletal gates of Blackwood Manor. The grimy windows, casting a weak, ethereal glow on a scene that seemed frozen in time, a tableau of arrested Alara stood for a long moment, a solitary figure in the fading light, the cool, damp air pressing in on her. Decay. Alara stood in the cavernous hallway, her heart pounding a nervous tattoo against her ribs, her senses overwhelmed by the gates were locked, chained, a clear, unambiguous statement of keep out. But a small, rusted sign, sheer, oppressive stillness of the place. It wasn't just quiet. It was a silence that seemed to have weight barely legible, bore the name Blackwood Manor, confirming that this was indeed her strange, unexpected inheritance. She found substance, a silence that hummed with the unspoken stories, the forgotten sorrows of a life lived in utter isolation. She moved cautiously, her footsteps echoing unnaturally on the dusty floorboards, her hand trailing along a wall covered in faded, peeling wallpaper, a section of the crumbling stone wall that was low enough to climb. Her practical city shoes slipping on the damp, moss-covered stones a pattern of once vibrant, now ghostly, roses. The house was a labyrinth of dim, interconnected rooms, each one. She swung her bag over, then followed, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. The track beyond the gates was as Henderson had described, a barely discernible path, choked with weeds, flanked by ancient, gnarled trees whose filled with furniture shrouded in white dust cloths, like pale, silent ghosts guarding the secrets of the past. In the parlor, a grand piano, its keys yellowed and chipped, stood silent, a magnificent, mute testament to a music long branches, like skeletal fingers, seemed to claw at the bruised, purple sky. The air here was even cooler, heavy with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something faint, almost imperceptible as scent of sin silenced. In the dining room, a long, mahogany table was set for a single person, a delicate porcelain teacup and saucer collecting a thick layer of dust, a silent, poignant reminder of her gray-tant's solitary existence. An age of profound, almost heartbreaking loneliness. After a 10-minute walk, the trees thinned, and she saw it. Was a house that whispered of loneliness, of a profound, almost pathological retreat from the world. Alara felt a wave Blackwood Manor. It was not merely a house. It was a presence, a magnificent, decaying beast of a place of sadness wash over her, a deep, empathetic ache for the woman she had never known, for the profound, unspoken, its stone walls stained with a century of rain and neglect, its windows dark, vacant eyes staring out at the overgrown sorrow that seemed to permeate the very walls of this house. What could have driven a person to such a state of utter gardens? Ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked up its walls, slowly, inexorably self-imposed isolation. What secrets, what griefs were held within these silent, decaying rooms? As she ventured pulling it back into the earth, the roof sagged in places, slates missing, a testament to the relentless assault deeper into the house. Her initial trepidation began to be tempered by a growing, almost morbid curiosity. She of time and weather. It was a place of profound, almost theatrical, melancholy, a place that whispered of forgotten stories, was an inheritor not just of a property, but of a mystery. And a part of her, the part that had always a faded grandeur, of a slow, inevitable surrender to the wild, untamed forces of nature. Alara stood before being drawn to the hidden stories, the unspoken truths, felt a strange, compelling pull to unravel it. She found her it, a sense of awe mingling with her trepidation. It was beautiful, in a strange, haunted, almost gray-tant bedroom on the second floor. It was a large, airy room, though now thick with dust and shadows, heartbreaking way. It was a canvas, she thought, a magnificent, complex canvas, filled with texture, with shadow, with the raw. The bed, a massive four-poster, was unmade, the sheets yellowed with age, as if its occupant had just risen, intending to return at any moment. On the bedside table, a pair of delicate, wire-rimmed spectacles, unvarnished truth of decay and resilience. A flicker of her old, long-suppressed artistic soul stirred within lay beside a worn, leather-bound book, a volume of poetry by a forgotten, melancholic poet. Alara picked her. The solicitor had provided her with a key, a large, ornate, rusted iron thing that felt heavy, ancient. Up the book, her fingers tracing the faded gold lettering on its spine. She opened it, and a single pressed in her hand. She found a massive oak front door, its surface weathered, cracked, its brass knocker, shaped wildflower. Its colors faded, but its delicate beauty still intact, fell from its pages. It was a small, poignant glimpse like a grim-faced gargoyle, tarnished with age. The key turned in the lock with a groan of protest into the soul of the woman who had lived here, a hint of a sensitivity, a love of beauty, that seemed, the sound echoing in the profound silence. The door swung open onto a darkness that seemed to swallow the fading light of at odds with the overwhelming sense of decay and sorrow that filled the house. Then she saw it, tucked away in a dusty corner, almost hidden behind a tall, ornate wardrobe, was a small, locked door. It was a door that the evening. Alara hesitated on the threshold, her hand reaching instinctively for the light switch. But of course, there was no electricity. She fumbled in her bag for the small, powerful flashlight she had, with uncharacteristic foresight, packed seemed out of place, its wood newer, its brass handle less tarnished than the other doors in the house. It was its beam cut a sharp, white swathe through the darkness, illuminating a scene of breathtaking, chaotic beauty. The entrance hall was vast, cavernous, its marble floor, once polished and pristine, now cracked and covered in a fine door that hummed with a strange, almost palpable sense of purpose. It was a door that was clearly not meant to be opened. Curiosity, now a powerful, undeniable force, seized her. She searched the room, her hands fumbling through dusty drawers, through the pockets of old, moth-eaten clothes hanging in the wardrobe. She found nothing. No key. No layer of dust and fallen leaves that had blown in through a broken window. A grand, sweeping staircase, its banister intricately clue. The door remained a silent, tantalizing enigma. Frustrated, yet more determined than ever, she returned her carved, its steps carpeted in a threadbare, once rich velvet, curved upwards into the gloom. Cobwebs, thick as attention to the small, locked door. She ran her hand over its smooth, polished surface, so different from the rough-spun silk, draped from the crystal chandelier, which hung like a magnificent, skeletal ghost from the high, vaulted ceiling. But it wasn't the decay, the neglect, that made Alara's breath catch in her throat. It was the splintered wood of the other doors. She tried the handle, jiggling it, pushing against it, but at the contents, the hall, the staircase, every available surface was filled, crammed, overflowing with art. Held firm, its lock a silent, unyielding guardian of whatever lay beyond. What could be so important, so precious that canvases leaned against the walls, some framed, some bare, their surfaces alive with vibrant, chaotic splashes of color, with her great aunt had felt the need to conceal it behind a locked, hidden door. What secrets lay within this house, within this family, that had been so carefully, so deliberately hidden from view? The question echoed in the silent, dusty dark, brooding landscapes, with portraits of faces so filled with emotion they seemed to breathe in the flashlight's beam. Sculptures, crafted from metal, from wood, from stone, stood like silent, enigmatic sentinels in the shadows. St. Room, a tantalizing whisper of a mystery that was far deeper, far more complex than Alara could ever have imagined. As she stood before the locked door, a sense of unease, of a dawning, almost superstitious fear begging acts of sketchbooks, their pages filled with frantic, passionate drawings, lay piled on antique tables. It was not a collection to creep back in. The house, she was beginning to realize, held more than just the dust and decay of a lonely. It was an explosion, a lifetime of fierce, unapologetic, and utterly uninhibited creativity left to languid, eccentric woman's life. It held a secret that had been locked away for generations, a secret fetish in the dust and the dark. Alara moved through the hall, her flashlight beam dancing over the chaotic, beautiful mess was, perhaps, best left undisturbed. But Alara Vance, a woman at a crossroads, a woman with nothing to a sense of wonder, of a dawning, profound recognition, beginning to bloom within her. Who was this Sarah Luz in a profound, almost desperate, need for answers, for meaning, for a connection to the enigmatic past that had so often thorn, this unknown great aunt, who had lived and created with such fierce, solitary passion. She unexpectedly become her present, knew that she would not walk away. She would find the key. She would unlock, ascended the grand staircase, her footsteps echoing in the vast silence. She explored the rooms, each one a new revelation. Of the door, and she would confront whatever secrets, whatever truths lay hidden in the silent, beating heart of this strange, sad library, its shelves crammed not with books, but with pigments, with brushes, with half-finished canvases. A music room, an increasingly mysterious house. The search for the key to the hidden door became Alara's singular, its grand piano, its strings broken, its ivory keys yellowed, covered in a riot of dried flowers and clay sculptures, consuming obsession. For days, she methodically, almost feverishly, sifted through the detritus of her gray-tant's solitary life, each object a small, poignant clue in a puzzle she was only just beginning to comprehend. A bedroom, its four-poster bed draped in canvases, its walls covered, floor to ceiling, in charcoal sketches, a frantic, beautiful, almost desperate attempt to capture the fleeting moments of a dream. This was not a house. It was a studio. She explored every dusty corner, every cobweb-shrouded attic, every damp, musty cellar of the rambling. A sanctuary, a testament to a life lived in the service of a single, all-consuming passion, art. And in the heart of it all, in the largest, most light-filled room at the top of the house, what must decaying house? She found old photographs, their subjects faded, forgotten figures staring out from a sepia-toned past. She found bundles of letters, tied with faded silk ribbons, their ink spider-webbed and almost illegible, filled up in Serafina's main studio. Alara found it. The thing that made her run out of the house, her with cryptic references to a great sorrow, a necessary sacrifice, a secret that must be kept for the family's heart pounding, tears streaming down her face, a single, choked sob escaping her lips. It was not something terrifying, not something grotesque. It was something far, far more profound. It was herself. The grand studio at the top of Blackwood Manor was bathed in the ethereal, silvery light of the rising moon, which filtered through the vast, grime-stressed sake. The words sent a chill down her spine, hinting at a tragedy far deeper, far more complex than she had imagined. She found her gray-tant's journals, volumes of them, filled with dense, looping script, a recordake skylight, illuminating a scene of breathtaking, organized chaos. Canvases in various states of completion were propped against every wall, their surfaces alive with a raw, almost violent energy, a riot of color and form that seemed to have a life lived in profound isolation, yet also, surprisingly, a life of intense intellectual and artistic pursuit. There were sketches of wildflowers pressed between the pages. There were detailed astronomical charts, mapping the constellations that wheeled across the night sky, visible with a breathtaking clarity in this remote, light pollution-free corner of the world. There were philosophical musings vibrate in the still, cool air. The floor was a battlefield of dried paint splatters, discarded brushes, and crumpled charcoal sketches. The very air was thick with the scent of turpentine, linseed oil, and old, dry canvas, the quotations from ancient texts, complex mathematical equations, the work of a brilliant, restless mind, a mind that had, for reasons still unknown, chosen to turn its back on the world. Yet, nowhere in the journals, nowhere in the letters, sacred, intoxicating perfume of a life devoted to art. And in the center of it all, on a massive, sturdy easel, stood a single, large, and startlingly, almost shockingly complete painting. It was this painting that was there any mention of the hidden door, of the secret it concealed. It was a deliberate omission, a silence that spoke volumes, that only deepened the mystery, that fueled Alara's determination to uncover the truth. Finally, after days of fruitless searching, sent Alara fleeing from the house, her heart a wild, frantic bird against her ribs, a profound, almost terrifying sense of recognition washing over her, so potent it felt like a physical blow. Now, after an hour spent pacing the overgrown, a flash of inspiration, or perhaps a whisper from the house itself, led her back to the parlor, to the silent gardens, her initial shock slowly giving way to a dawning, incredulous wonder, she found herself drawn back to the studio, grand piano. She remembered her own grandmother, a woman whose hands, though gnarled with age, had held a quiet, almost spiritual power. She remembered the secret compartments, the hidden drawers that her grandfather, a master craftsman, back to the painting, compelled by a force she couldn't comprehend, a need to understand the impossible truth it seemed to represent. The painting was a portrait of a young woman, no older than Alara herself, with a cascade of unruly dark hair, a small, determined chin, and eyes, deep, dark, and filled with a fierce had sometimes built into the furniture he created. Could it be? She ran her hands over the piano's polished, albeit dusty, surface, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings, the elegant lines. She pressed keys that produced only a dull, dissonant thud. She lifted the heavy lid, peering into the dusty, silent guts of the instrument, its strings rusted, its hammers limp. And then she saw it. A tiny, almost invisible discrepancy in the intricate woodwork of the music, almost heartbreaking, longing. The woman in the portrait was not just familiar. She was Alara, not a literal, photorealistic representation, but an uncanny, almost spiritual rendering of her very essence. The artist, this unknown Serafina Thorne, had captured not just her physical likeness, but the quiet weariness in her eyes, the subtle, almost imperceptible stoop of her shoulders, the faint, almost apologetic curve of her lips. It was a portrait of a woman whose stand. A faint line, a subtle seam, that hinted at something more. Her heart pounding, she pressed against the spot, her fingers fumbling, searching for a hidden catch, a secret spring. And then, with a soft, satisfying click, a small, hidden compartment sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded, worn velvet, lay a dreams had been deferred, whose spirit had been battered, but whose inner light, though dimmed, still flickered with a quiet, stubborn resilience. But it was the background of the portrait that truly, profoundly shook Alara to her core. Behind a figure's single, ornate, silver key, it was a key of exquisite, almost otherworldly craftsmanship. Its head a stylized rendering of a blossoming rose, its shaft intricately carved with a pattern of thorns. It was a key that hummed with a strange of herself. The artist had painted not a conventional studio backdrop, not a bucolic landscape, but a swirling, chaotic, and breathtakingly beautiful cosmic vista. Nebulae, rendered in vibrant, incandescent hues of crimson and sapphire, bloomed like almost palpable energy, a key that felt both beautiful and vaguely, unsettlingly, menacing. Alara took the key, its cool, heavy weight a solid, tangible reality in her trembling hand. This was it. The key to the hidden, celestial flowers. Galaxies, their spiral arms a dizzying dance of starlight and shadow, spun in the infinite darkness. It was a universe of raw, untamed, creative energy, a universe that seemed to be both surrounding and emanating from the quiet door. The key to her Greytant's secret. The key, perhaps, to her own future, unassuming figure in the foreground. It was a portrait of Alara, not as she was, but as she could, with a mixture of trepidation and a fierce, almost reckless, exhilaration. She rushed back upstairs to her Greytant's bedroom, to the small, locked door in the dusty corner. The key slid into the lock with a smooth bee. A portrait of her hidden, inner world, of the vibrant, colorful dream she had thought long dead. Now, almost seamless precision, as if it had been waiting for her hand, and hers alone. She turned it. The lock laid bare, with a terrifying and exhilarating clarity, on a canvas painted by a woman she had never met. How clicked open with a soft, final sound. The door, which had resisted all her previous, cruder attempts, now swung open silently, effortlessly, revealing not a dusty closet, not a hidden storage space, but a narrow, winding staircase. How could this be possible? How could a stranger, a ghost from a forgotten branch of her family tree, have seemed descending into a darkness so profound, so absolute, that it seemed to swallow the very light from the room. The air that into her soul with such profound, unnerving accuracy. Alara stepped closer, her flashlight beam tracing the intricate brushstrokes. Emanated from the darkness was cool, damp, carrying the scent of earth, of stone, of something ancient, something, the layers of color, the subtle textures of the paint. The technique was masterful, confident, almost aggressive. This alive. It was the scent of secrets, of a truth long buried, a truth that was now, finally, about to be unearthed. Alara hesitated for a heartbeat, her hand still on the doorknob. Her mind-a-ma was not the work of a hobbyist. This was the work of a true, and perhaps even great, artist, a woman who had wrestled with her demons, with her passions on the canvas, and had emerged, if not victorious, Elstrom of fear and anticipation. What lay at the bottom of these stairs? What secrets had her great-aunt so desperately, so carefully concealed? Was this a descent into madness? Or a journey towards a profound, and perhaps even terrifying revelation? But the pull of the unknown, the desperate need for answers, was too strong to resist. She took then at least, profoundly, unapologetically, herself. Beside the easel, on a small, paint-spattered table, lay a stack of leather-bound journals, their pages filled with a cramped, almost illegible script. Alara hesitated for a moment. Then, compelled by an irresistible need to understand, she picked one up. The journal, its pages brittle with age, fell open to a recent entry, dated just a few weeks before Serafina's death. A deep, shuddering breath, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, and, with a courage she hadn't known she possessed, she took the first step down into the darkness, into the silent, beating heart of the Albright house, and of her own, profoundly mysterious inheritance. The door swung shut behind her, plunging her into an absolute, disorienting blackness, the soft click of the latch a final, irrevocable severing of her connection to the world era. Her hands trembling, began to read. The words were a torrent of thought, of feeling, of a fierce, almost desperate artistic passion. Serafina wrote of her visions, of her dreams, of the faces and landscapes that haunted her imagination. And then Alara found it, a passage that made her blood run cold. I see her again, Serafina had written, her script a frantic, almost feverish scrawl. The girl with the sad eyes and the starlight in her soul. My grandniece, Alara. I have never met her, yet I know her. I see her in my dreams, a quiet, unassuming figure trapped in a world of beige above, to the life she had known. Her new reality, whatever it held, lay at the bottom of these stairs. The descent into the darkness was a journey into another realm, a slow, cautious passage into the earth's cold embrace. The air grew cooler, damper, with each step, the scent of damp stone and rich, loamy soil intensifying, mingling with a strange, almost metallic, tang that made Alara's nostrils tingle. She kept one hand on the rough, stone wall beside her, her only guide in the absolute, disorienting blackness, her other hand held out before her, a futile gesture against the unseen. The staircase, carved from the very rock beneath the house, spiraled downwards, seemingly endlessly, its steps worn smooth with age, and she sensed with use. This was no forgotten cellar. This was a passage, a well-trodden path to somewhere, or something. After what felt like an eternity, her feet finally touched level, her own vibrant colors hidden, suppressed. But I see the universe within her, the swirling nebulae of her hidden passions, the burning suns of her untapped potential. She is a masterpiece, waiting to be created. I must paint her. I must show her the truth of who she is, who she could be. It is my final work, my testament, my gift, to her, and to the art that has been both my torment and my salvation. Alara sank to the floor, the journal slipping from her nerveless fingers, her flashlight casting a single, trembling pool of light on the dusty floorboards. Tears streamed down her face, tears of shock, of grief, of a profound, almost mystical sense of connection to this woman, this artist, this stranger who had, somehow, seen into the deepest, most hidden corners of her soul. This house, this crumbling, dilapidated manor, was not a burden. It was not a liability. It was a legacy, a sacred trust, a testament to a life lived in the fierce, unapologetic pursuit of art. And the portrait this ground. She stood for a moment, her senses on high alert, her ears straining against the profound, almost ringing silence. The darkness was absolute, a thick, velvety blanket that seemed to press in on her from all sides. She fumbled in her pocket for her phone, its small, modern light a stark, almost sacrilegious, intrusion in this ancient, subterranean space. She switched it on, its beam cutting a narrow, uncertain swathe through the gloom. And what it revealed made her gasp, a small, sharp intake of breath that echoed unnaturally in the stillness. She was not in a cellar, not in a crypt. She was standing at the entrance to a vast, natural cavern, its ceiling lost in the shadows high above, adorned with breathtaking, glittering formations that sparkled and shimmered in the beam of her phone's light, like a constellation of captive stars. The cavern was filled with a soft, ethereal, almost magical light. A faint, otherworldly, impossible, breathtaking portrait was not just a painting. It was a mirror, a challenge, an invitation, an inheritance not of property, but of purpose. It was a quiet, powerful, and utterly transformative whisper from the past, from a kindred spirit, a whisper that seemed to say, "Do not let your colors fade, Ilera. Do not let your starlight die. Pick up your brush and paint your own magnificent, chaotic, and beautiful life." The dawn broke over Blackwood Manor, its gentle, rosy light filtering through the grime-streaked skylight of the studio, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the still, cool air. Ilera had not slept. She had spent the night in the studio, a solitary figure amidst the ghosts of Serafina Thorne's fierce, creative passion, reading the luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the strange, crystalline structures that grew in intricate, fantastical clusters from the cavern floor. In the center of the cavern, a small, crystal-clear pool of water reflected the shimmering light, its surface as still and smooth as polished glass. The air here was different, too. It was cool, yes, but also strangely, invigoratingly pure, humming with a subtle, almost palpable energy, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to thrum through the very soles of her feet, through her bones, through her very soul. It was a place of profound, almost sacred beauty, a hidden sanctuary, a secret world concealed beneath the decaying, sorrowful house above journals, her heart a tumultuous mixture of grief, awe, and a dawning, profound sense of purpose. The journals were a revelation, a raw, unfiltered chronicle of a life lived in the service of a relentless, often unforgiving, muse. Serafina, it seemed, had been a woman of immense, though largely unrecognized, talent, a painter whose vision was too bold, too unconventional for the staid, conservative art world of her time. She had been dismissed, ridiculed, her work deemed too emotional, too chaotic, too female. And so, she had retreated, turned her back on a world that refused to see her, and poured her life, her soul, her very essence onto her. Ilera moved forward, her footsteps silent on the soft, sandy floor of the cavern, her sense of fear slowly, surely, being replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of wonder. She ran her hand over one of her, a large, crystalline formation, its surface cool, smooth, and humming with that strange, gentle vibration. It felt alive. As her eyes adjusted to the ethereal light, she began to notice other details. Tucked away in alcoves around the cavern canvases, here, in the solitary, crumbling splendor of Blackwood Manor, she had lived and died a recluse, a ghost in her own magnificent, decaying masterpiece. But she had not been entirely alone. In her later years, as her health began to fail, she had become obsessed with a single, recurring vision. The vision of Alara, her last living relative, a girl she had never met, but whose spirit she seemed to recognize as a kindred one, a fellow artist whose own were signs of human habitation, of a life lived not just in solitude, but in communion with this extraordinary place. There was a small, hand-carved wooden desk, similar to the one in her gray tant's bedroom, upon which lay stacks of notebooks, their pages filled with intricate drawings of the crystalline formations, with complex mathematical equations, with philosophical musings on the nature of energy, of resonance, of life itself. There was a small, simple cot, a collection of worn, leather-bound books, a set of delicate, scientific-looking instruments of brass and glass, their purpose a mystery to her. And then she saw it. On the small, hand-carved desk, resting on a creative flame, was in danger of being extinguished by the drab, pragmatic demands of the world. The portrait, Alara now understood, was not just a painting. It was a communion, a desperate, reaching out across the chasm of time and space, an attempt by one solitary artist to save another from a similar fate. It was a legacy of hope, a passing of the torch, a fierce, silent plea to not let the vibrant colors of her soul fade to beige. As the sun climbed higher, casting long, golden shafts of light through the studio, illuminating the chaotic, beautiful mess with an almost ethereal glow, velvet cloth was a single, perfect, crystalline rose, identical in form to the one depicted on the silver key that had granted her access to this hidden world. It was a rose that seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light, its petals exquisitely formed, its beauty both natural and yet otherworldly. It was a rose that seemed to hum with that same, gentle, resonant energy that filled the entire cavern. This was her gray-tanned secret. This was the source of her seclusion. She hadn't been a mere recluse, a woman consumed by grief and sorrow. She had been a scientist, a mystic, a guardian of this extraordinary hidden place. She had been studying it, living with Alara, felt a profound, almost seismic shift within her. The weariness, the resignation, the quiet, grinding despair that had been her constant companion for so long began to recede, replaced by a new, unfamiliar, and exhilarating sense of possibility. She looked around the studio, at the stacked canvases, the discarded brushes, the splatters of dried paint on the floor. This was not a scene of decay. It was a scene of life, of struggle, of a fierce, unapologetic commitment to the act of creation. And she, Alara Vance, was now its custodian, its heir, its successor. A new resolve, quiet but unshakable, began to take root in her heart, protecting it from the outside world. Alara picked up one of the notebooks, its pages filled with her gray-tant's familiar, looping script. She read of her gray-tant's discovery of the cavern, of her growing understanding of its unique resonant properties, of her belief that the crystalline formations were not just inert minerals, but a form of life. A form of life that communicated not through words, but through vibrations, through frequencies, through a silent, universal language of pure, resonant energy. She read of her gray-tant's attempts to harness this energy, to understand its properties, its potential for healing. Healing. The words seemed to leap off the page, to resonate with a profound, personal significance for her. She would not let this place, this legacy, crumble into dust. She would not let Seraphina's fierce, beautiful, and heartbreakingly lonely spirit be forgotten. And she would absolutely not, let her own creative soul wither and die in a beige cubicle in a soulless city. The decision, when it came, felt as natural, as inevitable, as the rising of the sun. She would stay. She would reclaim this place, this legacy, this life. The house was a mess, yes. The roof leaked, the windows were broken, the plumbing, Alara, whose own life had been a study in quiet, unhealed wounds. As she stood in the shimmering, ethereal light of the cavern, surrounded by the evidence of her Greytant's secret, brilliant, and profoundly lonely life's work, Illyra felt a wave of emotion so potent it almost buckled her knees. It was a mixture of awe, of grief, of a dawning, incredulous understanding. She had inherited not just a crumbling house, but a legacy, a profound, almost sacred responsibility, and a secret that had the potential to change, not she suspected, was a nightmare. But it was also a sanctuary, a treasure trove, a place of immense, untapped potential. And she, Illyra, with her own quiet, methodical, and surprisingly resilient spirit, would bring it back to life. Her first call was to the solicitor, her voice clear, firm, a stark contrast to the hesitant, apologetic tone she had used just days before. "I will be accepting the inheritance, Mr. Abernathy," she stated, not just her own life, but perhaps the very world itself. But as she read on, a new, more chilling realization began to dawn. Her Greytant's journal spoke not just of discovery, but of danger, of a threat from the outside world, of powerful, ruthless individuals who sought to exploit the cavern's unique properties for their own, as a question, but as a declaration. Blackwood Manor, and all its contents. I will be taking up residence immediately. The solicitor on the other end of the line was clearly nonplussed, sputtering about liabilities, about costs, about selfish and potentially destructive ends. She had hidden herself away not just out of eccentricity, but out of a desperate, profound need to protect this sacred place, this fragile, unique ecosystem from the greed and ignorance of the sheer, unadulterated folly of such a decision. But Illyra was firm. She would not be dissuaded world above. The final entry in the journal was a hurried, almost frantic scrawl, dated just days before her death. Her second call was to her landlord in the city, her voice equally resolute as she gave her notice. Her third was to her boss, a brief, polite, and utterly unapologetic resignation. She was done with beige. She was their coming. I can feel their dissonance, their disruptive energy. I have hidden the key. Only one of my own blood, one who understands the silence, who feels the resonance, will be able to find it. I pray done with soulless data entry. She was done with a life lived in muted, practical hues. She was and she comes soon. I pray she has the courage to protect the heart of the rose. The heart of the rose. Artist. And she was finally coming home. She spent the rest of the day exploring the house. Not as Illyra looked at the crystalline flower on the desk, its gentle light pulsing like a slow, steady heartbeat. The mystery a liability, but as a project, her artist's eye seeing not decay, but potential. She saw the way of her inheritance had just deepened, had just become infinitely more complex and infinitely more dangerous. She was no longer just as the light fell in a library, the perfect spot for a new easel. She saw the potential for a gallery and the grand inheritor of a secret. She was its new guardian. And the world, she was beginning to realize, was far, echoing ballroom. She saw the overgrown gardens not as a tangled mess, but as a future source of inspiration, of more strange, far more mysterious, and far more perilous than she could ever have imagined. Illyra spent the next few days color of life. She found a small, dusty workshop in the cellar, filled with her Greytant's surprisingly extensive collection of woodworking tools, and she knew, with a quiet, certain joy, that she would learn to repair the, perhaps even weeks. Time seemed to lose its conventional meaning in the timeless, ethereal light of the cavern. Immersed in her Greytant's research, she devoured the notebooks, her mind, once dulled by the monotonous rhythm of her city-leaking roof, to fix the broken windows, to mend the crumbling walls, with her own two hands. As evening fell, she returned life, now crackling with a new, exhilarating energy. She learned of her Greytant's theories, of to the grand studio, her heart filled with a sense of purpose, a belonging that she had not felt in years her experiments, of her profound, almost spiritual connection to the crystalline formations, which she had named the Resonance. She stood before the magnificent, impossible portrait of herself, her reflection staring back at her from the swirling, cosmic canvas, her eyes filled not with sadness, but with a dawning, fierce, and beautiful hope. She reached out her fingers. She learned of their ability to generate a subtle, healing energy, a frequency that seemed to promote cellular regeneration, to gently tracing the painted image of the vibrant, starlit universe that lay within her. Thank you, Serafina. Soothe emotional trauma, to restore a sense of profound, internal harmony. It was a science that bordered on magic, a knowledge she whispered to the silent, listening house, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for seeing me, for remembering that defied all conventional understanding. Yet her gray-tance, detailed, meticulous notes, her careful, methodical experiments for saving me. The journey ahead would be long, arduous, filled with challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But as Alara Vance stood in the heart of her strange, magnificent, and now profoundly meaningful inheritance, she lent it an undeniable, almost terrifying credibility. As Alara delved deeper, she began to understand the true nature of her own, long-suppressed sensitivities. Her keen hearing, her almost preternatural awareness of subtle vibrations knew, with a certainty that resonated in the very core of her being, that she was no longer lost. She had found her canvas. She had found her colors. And she was finally ready to paint. The transformation of Blackwood Manor, her intuitive understanding of unspoken currents, these were not just quirks of her personality. They were a part of her inheritance, a genetic predisposition to perceive the subtle, resonant frequencies of the world, a gift she now shared with her enigmatic, brilliant great-aunt. She began to conduct her own tentative experiments, following her gray-tance detailed, and of Alara Vance herself, was not an overnight miracle, but a slow, steady, and often grueling process of reclamation. The first few months were a baptism by fire. Alara learned the harsh, practical realities of restoring a crumbling, neglected house, her days filled with the unfamiliar rhythms of manual labor. Her hands, once soft and accustomed only to a keyboard, now call instructions. She learned to attune herself to the gentle hum of the cavern, to feel its vibrations not just in her body, but in her very soul. She learned to hold the crystalline rose, to feel its gentle, pulsing energy, to allow its healing frequency to wash over her, to soothe the bruised, weary corners of her own heart. A profound, almost miraculous transformation began to take place within her. The weariness that had been her constant companion for so long began to recede, replaced by a new, vibrant energy. The anxious flutter in her chest, the constant, gnawing sense of unease, was replaced by a deep, profound sense of peace, of belonging. She was no longer just alloused, strong, and stained with paint, with plaster, with the very earth of her inheritance. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that they would stop at nothing to get it. But her fear, her panic, was now overlaid with a cold, clear, righteous anger. These men, with their casual threats, their dismissive contempt, their rapacious greed, would not defile this sacred place. Now she drew breath. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, her voice unwavering, her gaze steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The man sighed, a sound of theatrical, almost bored, exasperation. "Very well, Miss Vance," he said. "Have it your way." We solitary life, adding a rich, poignant layer of context to the exhibition. The opening night of Serafina Thorne, the Blackwood retrospective, was a resounding success. Critics, collectors, art lovers from around the world made the pilgrimage to the remote, once-forgotten manor, their initial skepticism quickly giving way to a profound, almost overwhelming sense of discovery. They wandered through the restored rooms, through the grand ballroom now filled with Serafina's most powerful, most challenging works, their hushed whispers a symphony of awe and reverence. But the centerpiece of the exhibition, the painting that Drew Can Do This the Easy Way, or the hard way. He gestured to his silent, hulking companion, who took a step forward, his hands flexing a silent, eloquent promise of violence. In that moment, Ilara knew she had to act. She had to use her knowledge, her understanding of the cavern's unique properties, to turn their own strengths, their own arrogance, against them. "Wait," she said, her voice suddenly, surprisingly calm. "You are right. It would be unwise to refuse your generous offer. But the cavern, its entrance, it is the most gasps, the most tears, the most profound, silent contemplation, was the portrait of Ilara. It hung alone in the grand studio, bathed in the soft, ethereal light of the moon, a silent, powerful testament to the strange, mystical connection between two solitary artists, two kindred spirits, separated by time, yet united by a shared, profound understanding of the human heart and of the fierce, untamed, and often painful beauty of the creative spirit. Ilara stood protected by a rather unique security system, one that only I could disarm, a system that responds to specific resonant frequencies. The men exchanged a glance, a flicker of suspicion in their icy eyes. "A security system?" the tall man scoffed. "In this dilapidated ruin? You are bluffing, Miss Vance." "Am I?" Ilara quietly in the background, watching the reactions of the crowd, her heart a mixture of pride, of grief, of a profound, almost spiritual gratitude. She had not just restored a house. She had resurrected a legacy. She had not just found her own voice. She had given a powerful, posthumous voice to the great aunt she had never met replied, a faint, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. She gestured towards the silent, grand piano in the parlor. "The key, gentlemen, is not a key at all. It is a melody, a specific sequence of notes, played with a specific resonance, that deactivates the locking mechanism. One wrong note, one discordant vibration, and the entire entrance collapses. Or rather, ensuring that Serafina Thorne's fierce, beautiful, and heartbreakingly lonely genius would finally, irrevocably, be seen, be understood, be celebrated. The crumbling house, the strange, unexpected inheritance, had become not just her home, but her permanent security measure, designed by my great aunt to protect her work from unwelcome visitors. It was a lie, of course, a desperate, audacious, and utterly brilliant gamble. The men stared at her, then at the piano, calling her purpose her own magnificent, chaotic, and beautiful masterpiece. And as she looked at the portrait, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and a dawning, reluctant curiosity. They were men who understood power, who at the swirling, cosmic vista of starlight and nebulae that seemed to emanate from the very soul of the quiet, understood violence. But this was something else entirely. A security system based on music? It was absurd. Unassuming woman on the canvas, she knew, with a certainty that resonated in the deepest corners of her being, that her own journey, her own artistic exploration, her own dance with the beautiful, terrifying, and ultimately redemptive power of creation it was outlandish. And it was perhaps, just perhaps, true. "Very well, Miss Vance," the tall man said finally, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Show us. Play the melody. Open the door." And if this just begun, the colors were back, and they were more vibrant, more profound than she could ever have imagined. "Is some sort of trick, if you are wasting our time. I assure you, you will regret it." Profound. The success of the Serafina Thorne, the Blackwood retrospective, was not a fleeting, 9-day wonderly. Ilara met his gaze, her own eyes holding a new, quiet confidence. The game had shifted. It was a cultural phenomenon, a profound reevaluation of a lost artistic voice, a story that captured the imagination of was no longer just the terrified victim. She was the gatekeeper, the guardian of a mystery they could not comprehend. World, Blackwood Manor, once a symbol of decay and forgotten grandeur, became a destination, a place of pilgrimage for art lovers. "Of course, gentlemen," she said, her voice a silken caress. "But I must warn you, for dreamers, for those who sought solace and inspiration in its unique, haunting beauty. Alara Vance, the unassuming air, the resonant frequencies are delicate. They can be unpredictable. In the cavern, it does not take kindly to dissonance. The quiet restorer found herself, to her own profound surprise, at the helm of a thriving, internationally renowned. She walked towards the piano, her heart pounding, her mind racing, her desperate bluff the only thing standing between these cultural institutions. But she did not allow the fame, the acclaim, the sudden influx of wealth and attention to change ruthless men and the sacred, hidden heart of her inheritance. The final, dangerous act of this strange, unexpected drama was about to the essence of who she was, or of what Blackwood Manor had become. She established the Serafina Thorne Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting emerging, unconventional, and often overlooked female artists, providing them with the resources begin. Alara sat at the grand piano, its yellowed keys cool beneath her trembling fingertips. The two men stood over the recognition and the sanctuary that Serafina herself had so desperately lacked. The manor itself became a living, breathing testament to her, their imposing shadows falling across the dusty instrument, their presence a palpable, menacing weight in the silent parlor. She knew to this mission. Its rooms were transformed into artist studios, its grand ballroom a gallery for rotating exhibitions, its library a resource. Her bluff was a desperate, high-stakes gamble. The piano was ancient, its strings rusted, its hammers limp. Center for art historians and students. The overgrown gardens were revitalized, becoming a source of inspiration, of community. It was incapable of producing any true melody, any coherent sequence of notes. But they didn't know that. A place where local villagers and international artists could mingle, could share stories, could find a common ground in their shared love of with their world of brute force and conventional power, could not comprehend a security system based on something as ephemeral, as artistic beauty, of nature, of the quiet, profound truths that lay beyond the noise of the modern world. Alara, though, as music. Well, Miss Vance, the tall man growled, his patience wearing thin. We are waiting. Now, a respected, influential figure in the art world, remained grounded, her heart connected to her roots, to the lessons play the melody. Alara took a deep, steadying breath, her mind racing, searching for a way to turn of humility, of resilience, of the profound dignity of quiet, dedicated labor. She still found solace in the simple, methodical, this desperate lie into a strategic advantage. She remembered her Greytance journals, her theories on resonant frequencies, on the power of sympathetic vibrations. She remembered the strange, almost imperceptible hum of the cavern, the gentle, pulsing energy of work of maintaining the manor, in the feel of a well-worn tool in her hand, in the satisfaction of a perfectly the crystalline rose. An idea, wild, audacious, and utterly terrifying, began to form in her mind. It was a glazed window, a securely patched roof. She still painted, her own work deepening, evolving, imbued with a new, long shot, a gamble against the very laws of conventional physics, but it was all she had. The melody, quiet confidence, a profound understanding of the complex interplay of light and shadow, of joy and sorrow, of the beautiful, heartbreaking gentleman. She said, her voice surprisingly calm, her gaze fixed on the silent, dusty keys, is not a simple tune, an ultimately redemptive paradox of human existence. Henderson, the grizzled handyman, became the manor's beloved. It is a resonant sequence, a specific combination of frequencies that must be played with absolute precision, and it requires a focus, a conductor, if you will, to amplify the resonance, to channel the energy. She looked indispensable, head of operations, his practical wisdom a perfect counterbalance to Alara's artistic vision. Miller, the kindly up at them, her dark eyes holding a new, almost hypnotic intensity. I will need your assistance. Your baker established a small, charming cafe on the manor grounds, her blueberry muffins and rustic tarts becoming almost as famous as Sarah's focused energy. To create the necessary, harmonic field, the men exchanged a look of bewildered, contemptuous disbelief. Wadafina's paintings. Davies, the postman and local historian, became the curator of the newly established Black Is This Nonsense? The hulking companion grumbled, his voice a low, brutish rumble. Harmonic Field's wood archives, his deep knowledge of the manor's history, of Serafina's solitary life, now a valuable resource for scholars and visitors from around the world. The community that had rallied around Alara now thrive, they're small. We are not here to play New Age games, little girl. Silence, you fool, the tall man snapped, forgotten village revitalized by the influx of visitors, by the new sense of purpose, of shared identity. That Black, his own eyes narrowed, his mind, though skeptical, clearly intrigued by the sheer, unadulterated strangeness of Elwood Manor had brought to them. And Alara, the quiet woman who had once been trapped in a world of beige, no Wara's pronouncement. He looked at Alara, a flicker of something, avarice, intellectual curiosity. Waring lived in a world of vibrant, ever-changing color, a world she had, with her own two hands, with her own quiet courage, with the profound, unexpected legacy of her great-aunt, created. She had inherited not just a Crumbling with his ingrained suspicion. Explain yourself, Miss Vance. Quickly, Alara's heart pounded. This was a house, but a profound responsibility, a sacred trust. And in fulfilling that trust, in honoring the fierce, lonely spirit of the critical moment. The cavern gentleman, she began, her voice low, almost a whisper, yet imbued Serafina Thorne. She had not just resurrected a lost artistic voice. She had, in the process, created a masterpiece with an undeniable, almost mystical authority, is a living system. It responds to intention, to focused energy. The melody her own, a masterpiece of community, of hope, of the enduring, transformative power of art to heal, to connect. I must play is merely a trigger. The true key is a focused, sustained, resonant frequency. A frequency that can, and to remind us all of the vibrant, starlit universe that lies hidden, waiting to be discovered, within the quietest, most unassuming of souls. The story of Alara Vance and Blackwood Manor is a testament to the enduring power of only be generated by a powerful, concentrated source of psychic energy. Your combined, focused will, gentlemen, directed at quiet truth, a profound listening, and the unwavering belief that sometimes the most magnificent inheritances are not of wealth. The piano, at my hands, is the true amplifier. Without it, the melody is just noise. The door, but of purpose, and that the most crumbling of houses can be rebuilt, transformed into a shining beacon of hope, of creativity will remain sealed. And the consequences, as I mentioned, could be unfortunate. It was a masterpiece of pseudo-scientific gib and of the profound, redemptive beauty of a life lived in the full, glorious, and unapologetic expression of its true colors.